It's my great pleasure to be on stage with Ghayath.
Did it follow me correct? Wonderful. This is the first time happened. Thank you, Priya.
Well coordinated.
Thank you.
I hope we will also be well coordinated here together on stage. I'm sure we will. I first came across Ghayath's work last year when I had the pleasure of writing an introduction to you for the Day Fellowship, which you now hold.
Yes.
And so I read a lot of your oeuvre, and one of there's a line in Ghayath's poem Schizophrenia, which I think introduces him better than anything I could say. He wrote, "I am the Palestinian, Syrian, Swedish refugee wearing Levi's jeans invented by a Jewish immigrant from Germany in San Francisco, filling my camera with pictures like a Russian peasant woman filling a bucket with milk from under her cow, nodding my head like someone absorbing a lesson, the lesson of war." And Ghayath was born in a Yarmouk refugee camp in Damascus in 1979 to a family forced out of Palestine in the aftermath of the 1948 Nakba. He studied Arabic at university and published his first poetry collection aged 25. In 2008, he was forced to travel to Stockholm and take political asylum. And this book that you read from is your first book to be published in German.
Yes.
Hospitality is a theme, I think, that for both of us has very different connotations and resonances. For me, as somebody who's had the privilege of moving between countries and cultures and places freely, this word took on a particular resonance in the aftermath of 2016 for different reasons. So I guess I had always understood hospitality first and foremost in terms of something around the table. My family experience of being around the table is one of excess and exaggeration and too much food and pressure to eat too much and a general sense of abundance.
Exactly.
And then, as I said, because I am the holder of a British passport, which of course has its own colonial history, and which is a very difficult and vexed history, and my ancestors certainly paid a price for getting that passport. They moved from India to East Africa before going to Britain, but I myself, as a holder of that passport, experienced it just as an advantage, because it meant that my moving from London to Berlin was a very easy move. I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. I didn't have to fulfill any condition. I just decided to go and live in Berlin because the man I loved lived there, and that was possible. I didn't even need to announce that I was there until the day I decided to officially live there. So this was a kind of experience of unconditional hospitality that I had. And then in 2016, as many refugees arrived on the shores of Europe.
Yes.
And sought asylum, and there were very few countries, Germany and Sweden, perhaps the exceptions amongst them, who welcomed.
Yes, they are the only two European countries who opened the borders.
Who opened the borders. And so for the first time, I felt myself to be in a society that, an individual in a society that was obliged to receive people. And that was a kind of, there was a real shift for me, because it was a time of tremendous kind of inspiration of seeing people engaged, but also of uncertainty, as in, so how does this change my relationship to this place? And there were kind of doubts that came up that I hadn't expected. And then what also happened was that Great Britain voted to leave the European Union.
Yes.
And so for the first time, I also had the sense of being forced, as I saw the Brexit negotiations happen, to think about where I belonged and what that might mean. So suddenly this British passport wasn't part of the European Union, and I decided to apply for a German one, which, I mean, the fact that I could do that is also a privilege, but nevertheless, I felt what it is to be compelled to seek something because the place that you come from can't guarantee you something that always seemed to be self-evident. And you, of course, have had a much more difficult, traumatic experience of being forced. And I wonder how you see hospitality in terms of your particular journey.
Yeah, first, Great Britain, 1917, make promise for Rothschild that they will, it's called Balfour. He promised Rothschild, officially you could see it in the museum, that Great Britain will try to build a country for the Jewish in Palestine. And they, 1918, year after that, England, to make this real, they went to Palestine and they occupied Palestine, and then. So it's like you give a bag, not for you, for something he didn't own it. Yeah. So anyway, so this has happened 1917. So it's like long before I got born. But then I born in Damascus, and I find myself began to understand in the school, like, who am I and why the people say that I'm a Palestinian and they are Syrian, and why what I'm doing here, and why we are not in Palestine, and all these similar questions. I could go back to this question later, but I want to say something about tolerant. I really not disagree, how I should say it, I should be polite. I really don't like tolerant, because like, I am tolerant with this man, it means we are not equal. I believe in a society where all the people equal and no one should be tolerant to, like, I don't want Christianity to be tolerant to Muslims, white tolerant to black. I want the people to be equal. So the word itself, it's problematic, at least how I understand it in Arabic, tasamuh. But people fight for it, and in the same time, I feel that the fight is wrong. I born the opposite of you. I born stateless, like most of the Palestinian, paperless, not like most of the Palestinian. Most of the Palestinian arrived to Syria, for example, they came in 1948, and they have equal rights like the Syrian, without the rights of vote. And who care? Because there is no vote in Syria. But, and that because all the world accept in 1948 that the land that occupied from Palestine, 80% of the land, it is Israel. The United Nations accept that, United States of America, Soviet Union, and Europe. So the Arabic country understand this, so they give paper to the Palestinian to survive. When Israel occupied Gaza, and West Bank and Golan High from Syria and Sinai from Egypt and small part from Jordan. In that time they grow up from 20,000 kilometers to 200,000 kilometers, 10 times more. In that time, the United Nations and the Soviet Union and the European countries and the United States of America say this territory is under occupation. So the Arabic country decided to not give us any paper to put more pressure on Israel that give back this land. So I grew up in Syria without any paper, any document. I'm not allowed to work. I'm not allowed to own house. I'm not allowed to have drive lessons. I'm not allowed to inherit my mother. So I was in a situation, I can't describe it, like not without political rights. I was without human rights. My father, until now in Syria, he's not allowed to work. From 1970, he arrived to Syria. So that situation is really connected to Great Britain, where you have this passport, because I know, like later on, I understand why we lost our country and how the Jewish were killed in Europe, and 500 years of anti-Semitic began with Fernando and Isabella killing the Jewish and the Arabs in Spain, and ended with a final solution. And we pay our land as a solution for this European racism. This is take time until I understand it when I'm grown up. But as a child, you can say for him, there is a man was called Hitler in Europe, and he killed the Jewish, and they come to survive, and they took your land, and all this, it's very difficult. But I know that England in 1917 decided to give our land for people because there is some problem in Europe, they call it the Jewish question. And that was the country that offered you the passport.
Yeah, I know. It's a very difficult passport. I mean, I think even taking on the German citizenship, I mean, on the one hand, one feels a certain kind of gratitude and privilege to be able to have access to the citizenship and all it holds. Apparently, the German passport is the #1 passport in the world that gives you access to the most number of countries. I didn't know that until I checked it. I wouldn't have expected it to be the German one, but it is. I think the UK is also in the top 5. And of course, what these passports connote are very vexed and traumatic and difficult histories for many people, and that has meant restrictions and limitations. And so, I mean, this question of, I guess, how we host and remember history and what obligation that places us under. Early in the previous discussion, Annalise talked about empathy and how this can be a problematic term because, you know, it can come with a kind of arrogance and a kind of presumption to think that you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, even if that comes from goodwill. And I wonder if the same thing is a little bit with the idea of hospitality and being the host, that, you know, one is obliged to think about what has put you in a position to be able to receive. Like, what advantages did you have because of your particular, the background of your country and whatever exploitation or whatever crimes were done that gave your country certain advantages. And one of the kind of really troubling things about Britain is that we don't talk about the empire and the colonial history. We don't learn about it in school. And there's no, one doesn't kind of, everything that I've learned has been later as an adult. And there's no question that, of course, I think one has to continue to inform oneself and to learn and to be committed always to sort of growing one's sense of where one is in the world and one's historical knowledge. But I think not to have received that at that very formative stage is really decisive, and I feel a bit sort of angry about that too, that I didn't know this history, because our relations to each other are so dependent on and defined by that history, and if we don't know it, then I think we are at risk of making assumptions about each other, and also the kind of power dynamics between people are distorted. Because maybe you think you're in a better position vis-a-vis somebody than you actually are. So, for example, with Europe right now, I think this lack of awareness in many quarters that many of the people who are coming to Europe now, the fact that they need to come at all is a consequence of the actions of imperial powers over many years, and the decisions and the treaties that were signed. And so, I mean, I think you wrote in your piece a bit about history and Norway and silence, and how silence leads to a kind of failure to act.
Sweden, yes, Sweden and the darkness. And
Was that where you had the quote from Brecht, that silence in two languages?
Yeah, I was mentioning Finland because it was very weird for me that last year and this year that Finland is the most happy country in the world. Officially. I know from my childhood that Finland is the most sad country in the world. Anyone know that? So it's really opened my mind. Is these people serious? And then I find that they are serious. Yes, it is. Here is the problem. Who decided and which tool we measure the happiness? It is European-centered people make a law and measure things to measure the happiness. So I went to many places in the world. All the people in Brazil and India and Egypt, they are real happy. And Finland, officially, have won the biggest amount of depression drugs in the world, with Sweden and Norway. Officially, the people are depressed, nobody's speaking like this. But, so why they are happy? It is because what they own. Somebody mix between the happiness and what you own. Like, why you are happy in Finland? Yeah, I have a car, I have a house, I have a wife, okay, but this is your right. I didn't ask you about your rights. Everyone should have this. Why you are happy? What is your dreams? So it's really opened my mind. Finland. It was shock for me actually. If they say Sweden, like we could be a little angry, me and my friend, because we are not happy. But there is something going on in Stockholm. But
well, this question of happiness and values and how we measure is a really fascinating one. I think one that has kind of come up I missed some of the discussion this morning, but it was there last night, and in part of the discussion I heard before ours, and who sets the terms in which happiness or prosperity is decided. And what you say about rights, I think, is really interesting, because in the Western tradition of human rights, our rights are really, it's mainly about civil rights.
Yes.
And there's a movement called TWAIL, Third World Against International Law, and they really question this paradigm, because they say that, social and economic rights haven't been given the same priority, and also community rights, so that in the Western tradition, it's very much about the individual rights being protected, whereas kind of true or perhaps like a deeper sense of well-being comes out of there being a strong emphasis on community and togetherness. And so this was for me a kind of really startling and very destabilizing discovery, because I think we think of the human rights framework as being the kind of pinnacle of what we've achieved in the Western tradition. And there's no doubt that probably some of the best things in our societies have come out of the United Nations Declaration of Universal Rights or the European Convention on Human Rights, and at the same time to recognize that they're flawed and partial, and that they exclude, and as you say, this idea of material needs, certain material needs being met, that when those are there, that is a foundation on which you can begin to ask, are you happy or not? And it shouldn't just be dependent on having these things, but maybe what comes after those things are there.
I really agree. And I remember, like, my father, he was 6 months old when Israel took our house in Ashkelon. And then my family moved to make a tent in Gaza Strip in a camp called Khan Yunis, where my grandfather immediately died. He couldn't take it. And my grandmother, she took care of the children. My father grown up until he is 18 when Israel occupied Gaza, and they arrested him and they throw him to Egypt. He ended in Syria. And my grandmother, she stayed alone until she died in 2012. I never met her. She was alone all her life in Gaza. And I always think about this lady, this rich lady with big house in Ashkelon, huge farm full of trees, orange and olives. And suddenly, she finds herself in a tent. And because it's a masculine, macho society, this young man, he couldn't take that. He didn't have even food for the children. He died. The English, they call it the Nakba death. Most of the young Palestinian men died because they couldn't take it. And then she took care of the children, and then somebody took them and threw them out, and then she remained alone until she died. And then I left Syria because of the dictatorship, and then the Syrian revolution began. I prepared my bag because we will build democracy, we will take the Assad away, and the bag is ready. And then Assad regime win with the support of the world, either up the table, like Russia and Iran, or under the table, like the European who deal with him and the Western. And I lost my brother, my two uncles, all my friend, and he is in the power. And then after all this drama, having great life, traveling like hell, enjoying my life, and somebody ask me small question everywhere I go. It's a typical question, but this question became existential question. It is, how are you? When you meet people, how are you? And then, what I should say? Seriously. My family is under bombing and siege without water. I am enjoying the luxury life in Sweden with all this background, and what I should say in this moment, how are you? It's really, I wrote about this a lot in my poetry, because what you should say when you are living in a country where there are 97,500 lakes of sweet water and your mother is thirsty. So the question is about happiness it's not a simple question. I am happy, yes, but I am not. And I began to think about it in a different way. So there is nothing we can call this happy country or happy society or happy person. It is like life is mixed from many things going like this. And I don't know, we should accept it like it is. So I'm not a victim, huh? Clearly. I really enjoy my life, and the best life I have been in Syria. And I remember when my uncle, he's a Palestinian novelist, and he's the winner of the Arabic Booker Prize. When he became British citizen, he decided, like when I became Swedish, we became both of us Palestinian for the first time because we can't go to Palestine. So when he became British, he decided to go and see his mother, the first things he did. So he went to Gaza, and he spent 1 month there with his mother and our huge family in Gaza. And then I met him in London, and he told me the people in Gaza is, seriously, this is what I will never forget what he said for me. He said the most happy people he saw in all his life. They do nothing, only laughing and joking, and it's way of defend. It's like 1.5 million in this huge, small prison, all of them together, and all the time is either joking or laughing or eating and like. So he told me he was going there with all these cliches and stereotypes and Gaza and the big prison and all. It's not like that. He told me, we are sad in London, sitting on the subway like this and going to work and all the people having this. But in Gaza, it's not like that. So happiness is deeper than somebody say Finland is the most happy. Of course there's happy people in Finland. At least I know one. He's the Iraqi great novelist and short story, Hassan Blasem, who won the Independent Prize. And he lived in Finland, and he liked the article, by the way, so much. But his girlfriend was really like little. Yeah. So at least I know one happy person in Finland.
Well, it's so interesting what you say about this kind of need to question the assumptions about what happiness is and how it looks. And also this question of how, of kind of living with contradictions, of living with knowing that you enjoy certain advantages that are denied the people nearest and dearest to you, but also that you enjoy certain advantages that are denied so many other people. I think what you said made me think about how, because around the world, the main way in which the kind of effectiveness and success of nations is measured is with GDP. Yeah. And until Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, came up with his idea of capabilities and led to this change so that we now have the Human Development Index as well from the UN. But even that is quite limited because that's like to do with the length of your life, the kind of education you have, the knowledge you have, and different lifestyle measures. And what I find really interesting is the work that the philosopher Martha Nussbaum has done, building on Amartya Sen's work, working with him and then building on it. And she uses the word capabilities as a measure, to think of that as a measure, and for her, that has to do with always thinking in a very kind of plural way, and not to assume that the same things have the same value or effect in different places. And what you said about laughter as a defense mechanism in very, very dire circumstances, I think is a kind of capability. It's like a sort of choice that is made in those circumstances. And even if it's, maybe you could say it's not a choice. Would you say it's not a choice? But it seems to me that there is something about this approach, this capacity to find something that lifts you out of a really awful reality that is not often measured or given value in our society, but is maybe given value more in literature.
But Priya, if there is a time machine and you could go back to the time, do you will change anything in your past?
In my past?
Yeah. I really like it. I will not. I will repeat it the same. It was really joyful. especially in the period in the Palestinian refugee camp, playing in the family and what make us what we are now. I will not change it for anything. You know, in the end, life, it could be good and bad, heavy and soft in any society. Why Sweden have long, like in the 60s, 70s, have this high rate of suicide? When they were one of the most rich and have everything they want. And speaking about 70s, 80s, beginning of 90s, it was really like this. While people in dictatorship.
And why did they have that high rate? Because of loneliness? Or
darkness, the winter, the reflection,
depression.
and the reflection of darkness on people, and that a material society where everything could be measured by how the value of it. But do you think you will change something?
No.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I know, yeah.
I don't know if that's something everybody would say.
Yeah, of course, if there is something really what we call this main problem that changed the life, when there's a violence, sexual violence, of course we will change. But I say, if not, like our parents, our family, our background, yeah, I will choose always to be Palestinian. Not because I'm national, not because I really know great things. I have in my memory, great memories, so I'm satisfied.
One of the things that also comes up in your piece is this idea of, again, picking up on the idea of contrasts, that that there are multiple realities that you're part of, even if you're in one place.
Yeah.
And you talked about when you talk to your mum on the phone and you hear the bombs in the background going off, and then she calls you worried about a storm that's coming in. And so these different ideas of where the threat is and what the threat is, I think is also...
Because they have filtered. My mother, she didn't hear the bombing anymore. You know, like they were scared in the first 1 year, but then began to use, and then there is something happen, some kind of mechanism that the mind make a filter. So she even didn't hear it. So she always say for me, my mother, she could say strange things. For example, I learned her that the Syrian security is listening, so we should speak about symbols. So she could say like, oh, there is a lot of clouds, and there is a storm coming. So cloud is like, let's say, for example, airplane, storm is coming, so the Syrian army will come soon. And raining, it's bombing. But my mother, sometimes she ruined everything. So once she told me that it was raining, and it was the middle of summer in Syria, July, I think it would never happen rain in the history of Syria. And once she told me that was raining, so I understand heavy rain, she said, yes, it was heavy rain. And the day after she told me, oh, yes, today it's raining, but real rain, not like yesterday. So she was like, I thought, okay, wonderful. But, and then she told me, like this, the one I published, it's a real story when she told me like how she cut the aubergine and the zucchini, and we couldn't arrive to the butcher, so it will be vegetarian, and like this, and I can hear the bombing, and like this. And I say, what's going on? I told her, what is the sound behind you? She told me, which sound? Yeah, it's like, it's raining. It's like, and then this, the storm, that's 2 years ago, they announced in Al Jazeera that there is a storm will arrive to Sweden. And then she called me and she was panic. And I could hear the bombing behind me. And she told me, well, how are you? How's like... Yeah, so could you imagine that a lady under bombing, she's calling me because there is storm?
Well, I wondered if she had perhaps, because I read that in Sweden recently, there have actually been, in this year only, 100 bomb explosions in different parts of the city.
Yeah, in Malmo mostly.
Yeah, and it said that they're different gangs. I mean, they're not trying to actually kill passers-by, but sort of give signals to each other. And so this is also why, this has apparently been, this news has gone around the world, and people are really shocked that there are bombs going off in Sweden. And I wondered if your mom had heard about this and just thought, oh my goodness.
No, I told her a long time ago that this is what happened mostly in Malmo. We are outside the question, that it's the mafia circle. They are dealing with each other. So if there is shooting or like this, they shoot each other. Then, like, you didn't give me the money, you control this area. So we are outside the question. And I don't know what to say. Maybe the Swedish police like that these people get rid of from each other.
Well,
I don't want to say more than this, but it's like they are a close circle.
It's not something you associate with Sweden, so that's why I find it very interesting as also a contrast to your story that, we have these ideas of what is happening in a society, of what makes it a good place to live, and then there are these kind of other things that are at play, which reveal that, all is not perhaps as hospitable and as welcoming for all.
Of course, these people they live in the parallel. They are not part from the societies they came from, and they are not able to be part of the Swedish society. They are not accepted if they go back to Lebanon or Syria or Balkan or Latin America, because they call them the Swede, and they are no way to be part of the Swedish society because it's in a way closed. Maybe the third generation, not even the second. So these people, in a way, I see it, they are forced to be like this. They have strange names, nobody gives them job, they are discriminated everywhere, they live in ghettos, and then somebody say, what these people doing? Of course, if you do this, you will harvest. These things are typical. Think about countries where the violence coming a reaction for political things. Think about Caracas. People died in Caracas more than the people who died in the Syrian war every day. Could you imagine? There is no war in Venezuela, and the amount of people every day died in Caracas more than people who died in Aleppo or the whole country of Syria with bombing. So it's not only about, Chicago or suburb of London. So it is not connected always to immigration and race and like this.
No, it's connected to politics.
Yes, and many things, and class and gender and patriarchy and colonies and...
And so before you got to Berlin, you were living in Amsterdam for 6 months. You had a fellowship. And so you've had this experience of kind of moving through Europe.
The whole time, yeah.
Yeah.
And with California even, yeah.
Yes, different societies, different sort of forms of welcome. And I wondered if there is something like that has stood out for you, because the milieu that you're moving in, the thing that enables you to go is your writing. I mean, this is why you are invited. This is what has opened up these possibilities. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about this, what literature as a form, what poetry opens in terms of a kind of the generosity that's possible in there to connect, to exchange, and perhaps to give us a different way into a place.
Yeah, I'm very fascinated by the Quran, and it's the document where I lie on my Arabic language, because it's a very beautiful written language in literary way. And I remember when I was, there is a section in the Quran, it's called the poet section, and in the end of it there is a line where the God say, about the poets, he say, don't you see that they are traveling everywhere? أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ. And I say, wow, poets traveling all the time? I want to be a poet. Because I was paperless in that time. And I'm the only person who can't travel. Yeah, so. And it's appeared that it's true, that the God was right. No, but I was enjoying traveling, but then it became different. So I was traveling a lot, but in the same time, I was based in Stockholm. So Stockholm, it's my place. And because Damascus was exist in the background, that one day when I am tired, Damascus is waiting for me. And then when Damascus began to shake, and when it began to disappear from me as a background, then Stockholm began to disappear, and I became little lost. Little, let's say little. So I began to travel more. And then my Syrian friends began to arrive. And even my brother, the one who younger than me, 1 year, he take his trip 8 months until he arrived to Stockholm. And then I began to notice something, that these people who were suffering in the war, around 6 months after they arrived, they began to be hit by the post-trauma stress disorder and the panic attacks and like this. And then I began to read about the subject, and I find that the Gypsies and the Jewish and the Polish people during the Second War and like this, they were suffering from the same. So I began to be afraid about myself, especially when my young brother got killed in 2016. So I say to myself, what if I travel in a way that I don't arrive, being on the road? So the post-trauma will not come. So I began to do this. So we go from residency to festival to poetry reading, and if there is empty space, I go to Arabic book fair, because we have 22 Arabic book fairs, and they cover the whole year, you understand? And then I got tired physically. Like it's make me good mentally, but tired physically. And then my girlfriend, she had even greater idea. She told me, what if you switch your residency, and then your mind will think that you are traveling outside Sweden, then you could travel less. So I went 6 months to Amsterdam and now 1 year to Berlin. So now I travel less, only 2-3 times every month, because my mind thinks that I'm traveling. So this is my way.
This is your trick.
No, but this is the way. You should find a way to defeat the war, because no one could defeat war. War is something huge.
Yeah, I think also this question of belonging and finding a way to somehow, outside of place and of people, to find another way of connecting and being somehow bonded somewhere. And for me, that has come out of political activity, like working, thinking and acting with others to create a kind of community, even if it's temporary. So, for example, I was the founder of an NGO, which called Wir machen das in Germany, and I founded this with other women, exactly. And this experience of continually coming together with others to realize a project in the world has been for me one of the most profound experiences of belonging and of welcome and of hospitality, because like you, I'm connected to many different places and many different worlds, and they're all quite far away from me. And even if my access to them is easier because the people are still there, the places are accessible, I have the papers to go, it is nevertheless a negotiation that is necessary. And so to find another way of having community and connection through, I think, political engagement has been one of the discoveries of my life. And I really strongly feel, and Hannah Arendt for me has articulated this sort of most profoundly, that there is a dimension in which we don't realize our full capacity except through political engagement and doing things in a public space with others. She calls it the space of appearance, and she talks about the need to see and be seen. And I think that's a really powerful notion, and especially because also as writers, it's kind of about retreating. I mean, your trick to go somewhere which is not your place, but to be there for longer as a way to kind of trick yourself into settling and being quiet enough to write. And for me, the political activity as a kind of counter, as a sort of a way of replenishing imagination before going back into the quiet of writing. I wouldn't call it my trick, but it's sort of my strategy to handle the kind of the unrootedness that has become my condition.
Yeah, I was telling Annelies Verbeek, where is Annelies? Yes, we were speaking about what I call, like it's a little weird, but I call this, what I write, I call it literature. And what I leave, I call it history of literature. So, and I try to make balance between the dinners where I invite writers to my home and cook and make some wine, and being in the discussions with them, and then the writing. So I try always to make balance. I don't give one more than one. So for me, what you leave is very, at least for me as a writer, what I leave, and especially the discussion with the intellectual and artist from all over the world, this is very important for me in my writing.
It's also a nourishment.
Exactly, and a city like Berlin.
Yeah.
Very cosmopolitan, multicultural, diverse city with the biggest amount of artists. As I always say, it's a concentration camp of artists. It is really something unbelievable, this city. I can't describe how much I like Berlin. I really advise you to move all of you to Berlin. What a great city, like, do they pay tax, these people?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Sure they do.
Because it is not far and expensive like in New York, and it's not a dictator without English speaking like Istanbul, and not destroyed like Damascus, and it's not gigantic and stealing your money like London.
Well, this is exactly. I mean,
so what a great city, and relax, everyone stay in.
But it's a hard-won state. I mean, right now, for example, there are these resistance movements against the rising of
but
rents.
They succeed to stop it for 5 years. Yes.
Exactly,
Yes.
and so I think this is also really interesting, the way that politics can create conditions that are really conducive to the flourishing of art, of culture, of people coming together. I mean, one of the things that was really interesting for me, I was in London earlier this week talking about hospitality, and quite a few people said to me they have the feeling that they are invited out less to eat, and they themselves host less. And they said that it was partly because, for example, London has got so expensive that people live much further out, so they're much further from each other. So the idea of traveling, to meet each other suddenly becomes a really big deal. And then rents are so expensive, people live in really tiny spaces where they maybe don't have a dining room. I mean, of course, you can also improvise and meet differently. It's so, but time, expense, space, all these things affect how we can be together. And what Berlin seems to have been managing so far, even if it too is subject to the general capitalist pressures, is to still be hospitable in that sense, that people feel they can live there and do the work they want to do.
Yeah,
and
I agree. And you meet, like sometimes even I meet Germans in Kreuzberg. Seriously. Last week I saw a German. No, I'm kidding, but it is like what the discussions and the art I saw in this 5 months spent, the first 5 months from the AD, in this last 5 months, it was like what? What a great place for artists to be. It's like you got a lot. Like I charge my memory by meeting the Syrians. There's 1 million Syrian in Germany. And of course, most of the Syrian artists, filmmaker, musician, and writers either will go to Paris or to Berlin. So there is a huge amount of Syrian music, Syrian art, Syrian writing. So I meet these people and charge my memory and going like this, and then I meet the Brazilian, I meet Latin American, and like the Canadian, Scandinavian, every day with other writers, got new ideas, seeing new exhibitions and like this. Yes, of course, this is not Stockholm. It's not Finland. So this is what I'm longing for. Like anyone who work in art, he would like to be in a city, especially if he born in a huge city like Damascus with 7 million. So the first things I got, it was Damascus. So I always longing to these gigantic cities. I really love gigantic city. I enjoy to see the big cities when I was in China and when I was in the States. And there's something inside me. So believing that we, the Homo sapien, we are the city makers. And because Damascus, they say that it is the oldest city in the world. It's only Jericho is oldest, but Jericho were destroyed. So I feel that every city in the world is a reflection of the first city, Damascus. So I feel proud even if the city more bigger. I really like it. But you see the article of I Oui.
Yes, yeah. I did.
So he say opposite what I say about Berlin.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, this is always something to remember too, that other people have a different experience of the space. Yeah. And again, it's to do with the privileges that you have, that we have. You have this amazing fellowship, which is so generous, and I have other advantages too that make my moving through that city easier. But I think what you talk about, this possibility for exchange,
yes.
I think this is so kind of fundamental, not just to kind of artistic flourishing, but to human flourishing. That we have the possibility also to talk, because I always thought that writing is like this domain in which I can work out things and sort of find my place in the world. And then, but I realized that there, as you say, there is this other component to that, which is to talk and to exchange. And even a forum like this, because you're kind of, to articulate your thought is different to writing it, and to kind of respond to another in the moment. And to do that with a kind of, also to try and stay, I mean, especially in this time when we find that so much of the kind of political debate is really charged and ugly and shrill and superficial, to remember that there's another way of talking, another kind of language that is exploratory, that is not necessarily directed towards convincing or changing a mind, but to just listening, understanding, and seeing where we overlap, and curious about where we don't and why. I'm actually very curious to know if you have any questions or reflections or anything you would like to add to our, we have just a few more minutes, but it would be really nice to open up and, be our guest, please.
So what is your answer when people ask, how are you?
Yeah, I always say, I am okay. But, you know what's going on in Syria, for example. I could say this. I try to share something. Yeah, I do that. Yes, I always do that. I'm annoying in this question. Especially in 2014, it was Gaza under bombing, and Dara, where my family live, under bombing, and I was calling both Gaza and Syria, like central. Yeah, but yeah, this is what I say. I'm okay.
I'm okay, but I wonder how our encounters would be if we all answered that question with a recognition of somewhere or someone where it's
speak
different.
About the environment.
Yeah, it would maybe really alter our sort of consciousness of,
But I remember something, because you see that we are as artists, we didn't make a lot of threatening for the middle class. And I should admit something, that the situation for us as artists is little different than, for me, for example, the situation for me is little different than the rest of the Syrian people who arrived. You understand me?
In what sense?
We are more accepted. They suffer. They were rejected.
Well, because we conform more to what is
because
acceptable.
Of the article, because you mentioned Hannah Arendt, you remember her article, We Refugees.
Mm-hmm.
In this article, she described the situation of the Jewish refugees who arrived to New York. And she described how all of them don't want to be refugees, and they say we are immigrant. Even they change the sign from refugees to immigrant office, or you understand me. And I feel we have privilege enough, at least for me, to be immigrant, and they are refugees. even if I born as a refugee, and I'm proud of that because like, I born in Syria as a refugee, and then I choose to be a refugee, so it's a double. But seriously, this lady, Hannah Arendt, she's really genius. She is really, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to convince me. I'm sure everybody
so
here
to
would,
be an artist or writer or some kind of, you are, in a way, you are immigrant. Not.
Well, there's that Bologna line, isn't it? Simply to enter into literature is to become an exile, because you agree to leave a world you know and enter one that you don't, and to go wherever it might go. So that experience of imagination, of kind of transgression through imagination. But I mean, what you make is a much more serious point of who is really taken in, who is really welcomed, and who not, and why. I mean, it's so interesting, this word refugee, because obviously it is supposed to be a guarantee of a certain kind of treatment. And we have this Geneva Convention. We have international laws that is meant to protect this category and make it like a dignified position to be in when the cause of it is so awful and so undignified. And I think it's a real indictment of us that this word has become one that is somehow classified now, immigrant, refugee, and that it's like the one you don't want to be. I mean, of course, one doesn't want to be it because it means that something terrible happened that made you that, and yet one doesn't want to be it even arriving, because it means you get treated not according to the law, but that you get disadvantaged by this. I think that's really problematic, that that this word has become so negative.
I'm a refugee.
It
could be volcano, it could be earthquake, it could be war. Like, it's very fast. Anyone could be a refugee. So it's not a question this or that, or who you treat them. It should be low. And I really respect Angela Merkel in Germany when they opened the borders. So the Syrian 2015, they are drawn in the sea, more and more. And it's the title, it's a predator called the Mediterranean, because it's became a predator eating the Syrian bodies. And then the party was thinking, the Balkan country, they closed the borders, and the Syrian took the sea and drawn. But if we open our borders, then the whole country from Hungary to this, they will let them go to Germany. And we will let these people survive. But why they do this? Because they were looking to the past. You understand me? Because they have warning from history. And they don't want to take these moral things in the future. So with all respect, don't think about what will happen. Think about people need to survive first. And then we discuss everything. And because of that, I really respect Germany and Sweden so much that they learn from the past about Evian Conference, 1938. I have my new poem is about it. It's called Evian. In Evian Conference, they make it in the city of Evian in Switzerland, the borders of France. Can I say? Yeah. 32 European countries decided to meet in 1938 to discuss the refugee crisis of the Jewish who left Austria and Germany. And guess what? They decided to not accept even one Jewish. United States say, I will not change the quota of numbers. And England say, England is not country of immigration. And then the Nazi newspaper write an article without name. Mostly it's by Adolf Hitler. He say, no one want them. And 4 months after that, the Crystal Night began and lead to the final solution. It is the history repeat itself. They use even the same word. I will repeat it for you. They have different value. They are dirty. Their religious is different. They came to steal our women. They come to steal our money. I swear, I translate them from German. Exactly. And you could read about this Evian restaurant conference, and you will understand that history really repeats itself. And that what they call Syrian refugee crisis, it is not. It is exactly the same. They refused to take even one Jewish refugee. This is how I see the things. We have fish memory. Yeah, so I'm stuck on this planet. I don't know what to do. Yeah,
All of us.
No,
all
but
of us
if I
are,
was
so-
born in 2700 or 3000, I will go outside this galaxy. I will leave it all. The Palestinian-Israeli question, everything. But I born in this time, and I went to most of this planet. I finish it, and there is no more place to go, and I'm stuck, sitting like this.
Yeah, we're stuck with each other, and maybe we can find some final consolation in words. We both will just read a short passage to finish.
Yeah.
Should go
As you
first?
like.
I really don't mind.
Yes, I can read. and
Okay,
then
you read.
Yes, to make it opposite. Yes, massacre. المجزرة مجاز ميت يأكل أصدقائي يأكلهم بلا ملح كانوا شعراء وأصبحوا مراسلين مع حدود كانوا متعبين وأصبحوا متعبين جدا يعبرون الجسر في الصبح خفافا ويموتون خارج التغطية إنني أراهم بالمناظير الليلية وأتتبع حرارة أجسادهم في الظلام المجزرة مجاز ميت يخرج من التلفزيون ويأكل أصدقائي دون رشة ملح واحدة.
Vielen Dank. 16.
I just finish with, sorry, just a slightly different tone, but that is also part of what hospitality is, to have many different kinds of voices. In English, to cook something up means to prepare food, but also to invent stories or schemes, to concoct something out of fantasy. When I first started writing, I also baked a lot, mostly on days when the writing wasn't going well. It soothed me alongside the slow and intangible creation of a novel, to cook up something that was quickly ready and edible. A cake can bring simple, instant self-gratification and appreciation from others, whereas writing, for all its rewards, is always accompanied by Stories enact a form of mutual hospitality. What is a story, if not an enticement to stay? Story and listener open, unfold into, and harbor each other.
Thank you.